He lost his horse, and when he came back, he brought a mysterious Apache woman. Eli woke up that morning to the soft pink light of dawn spilling across the open plains. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of earth and dew. He stretched his arms, feeling the chill brush against his skin, and glanced toward the stable. Something was wrong. The door of his small wooden barn creaked in the morning breeze, but inside the space felt empty. His heart skipped a beat. "Where?" Eli whispered to himself. He ran toward the barn, his boots kicking up tiny clouds of dust. His prized horse, Shadow, was gone. Shadow was not just a horse. He was Eli's companion, his trusted partner through long days of work and even longer nights of solitude. The horse's sleek black coat and intelligent eyes made him unique, and Eli had raised him from a colt. Losing him felt like losing a piece of his own soul. Panic began to rise in Eli's chest. He ran his hands along the empty stalls, searching for any clue. The harness hung neatly on a hook, the feed bucket was untouched. There were no signs of a struggle. Whoever, or whatever, had taken Shadow had done it silently, like a shadow itself. Eli's mind raced. He had heard stories of wild animals, rustlers and wandering tribes, but Shadow was fast and clever. How could anyone steal him without leaving a trace? Without wasting a moment, Eli grabbed his coat and saddled up the next best horse he owned, a smaller mare named Daisy. She was reliable but not fast, not like Shadow. Still, he had no choice. He needed to follow the trail, and he needed to do it quickly. The plains were wide and unforgiving, and a horse like Shadow could disappear into the horizon in an instant. As he rode, Eli scanned the ground for signs. The earth was dry in some places, soft and muddy in others. He followed the tracks carefully, trying to ignore the fear gnawing at him. Each hoof print was a clue, but the further he went, the more the trail seemed to fade. It was as if Shadow had melted into the earth itself. Eli urged Daisy forward, her hooves thumping against the hard soil, echoing in the quiet morning. The wind picked up, carrying with it the distant cries of birds and the faint rustle of leaves. Eli felt the loneliness of the land pressing in on him. There were no roads, no towns nearby, just miles of endless plains, rolling hills and scattered trees. Yet, amidst the silence, he felt a strange connection to the land. He had grown up here, learned its moods, its dangers, and its secrets. He knew that survival depended on patience, courage, and observation. But still, losing Shadow was a pain unlike any other he had felt. Hours passed, and the sun climbed higher in the sky. Eli's throat was dry, his legs ached, but he could not stop. Every rock, every bush, every patch of grass seemed to hold a secret, and he examined each carefully. Sometimes he thought he saw a flicker of black in the distance. Could it be Shadow? He would ride toward it, only to find it was a shadow of a tree or a passing bird. Each false hope made his heart ache more. By midday, Eli found himself in a narrow canyon, the walls rising high on either side, casting deep shadows. The heat reflected off the rocks, making the canyon shimmer like a dream. He dismounted, leading Daisy by the reins, scanning the ground. Here the earth was softer, marked with tracks of deer, coyotes, and perhaps other horses. He crouched low, inspecting the hoof prints, trying to determine which were Shadow's. He noticed a peculiar set of tracks, larger than Daisy's but smaller than most wild horses he had seen. They were fresh. Eli's heart leaped. Shadow was near. As he moved deeper into the canyon, Eli heard a sudden rustle in the brush. His hand instinctively went to his knife, though he hoped it was nothing dangerous. A rabbit darted out, disappearing into the rocks. Eli exhaled slowly, trying to calm his racing heart. He reminded himself that he had faced danger before, wild animals, storms, even a rattlesnake bite once. He could handle whatever came, but he had to find Shadow before nightfall. The canyon would be treacherous in the dark. The afternoon wore on, and Eli's thoughts wandered. He remembered the first day Shadow had arrived at the farm. A tiny black colt, scared and skittish, who had hidden in the corner of the stable. Eli had spent weeks earning his trust, speaking softly, offering sugar cubes and brushing his coat until it gleamed. Shadow had grown strong and loyal, a reflection of Eli's own determination. Losing him now felt like all that time, all that love, was in danger of vanishing. Eli pressed on, following the faint hoof prints winding along the canyon floor. The sun began its descent, casting golden rays across the rocks. Shadows stretched long and deep, and the canyon's beauty seemed almost magical, yet Eli had no time to admire it. Every minute counted. He called out softly, "Shadow." "Here, boy," his voice echoed against the canyon walls, fading into silence. There was no answer, only the wind whispering back. Then suddenly he saw a movement, a black shape darting between the rocks. His heart pounded. He spurred Daisy forward, moving carefully so as not to startle the horse. As he approached, the shape vanished again, leaving him frustrated but determined. Eli stopped, taking a deep breath. He knew he had to think, not just act. Shadow was clever, and the horse had always been able to sense danger. Whoever had taken him must be hiding, and Shadow might be frightened. Patience would be key. Night began to fall, painting the canyon in deep shades of purple and blue. Stars appeared one by one, twinkling in the vast sky above. Eli set up a small camp, tying Daisy to a sturdy tree. He gathered some dry wood and lit a small fire, the flames casting a warm glow. He sat beside it, thinking, planning, and whispering Shadow's name into the night. The cold nipped at his fingers and cheeks, but Eli did not complain. He could endure anything if it meant finding Shadow. As he sat in the quiet, Eli's thoughts drifted to home. The small cabin, the stable, the familiar smell of hay and leather, all of it seemed so distant now. He realized how much he had taken Shadow for granted, assuming the horse would always be there. Now, faced with the possibility of losing him forever, he understood the depth of his bond. Shadow was more than an animal, he was family. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by strange noises in the canyon: owl hoots, the rustle of leaves, and the occasional distant howl of a coyote. Eli dreamed of running through open fields, of finding Shadow grazing calmly in the sun, of the relief he would feel when he finally saw those familiar black eyes. When he woke, the first light of dawn painted the canyon in soft gold. He was more determined than ever. With renewed energy, Eli saddled Daisy and continued his search. The canyon twisted and turned, leading him through hidden valleys and over rocky ridges. He called out again, his voice echoing, hoping to reach Shadow. And then in a small clearing he saw hoof prints leading toward a hidden trail. The trail was narrow, winding into a dense forest. Eli felt a spark of hope. Shadow was close, perhaps closer than he had ever imagined. Eli tightened the reins, his heart filled with determination. He had lost his horse, yes, but he would not give up. The plains, the canyon, the wilderness, they were all part of the challenge. And Eli knew that if he stayed patient, careful, and courageous, he would find Shadow. He could feel it in his bones, in the rhythm of Daisy's hooves, and in the wind that whispered through the trees. The search was just beginning, and the story of loss, hope, and courage would soon take him to places he had never imagined. Eli followed the narrow trail into the dense forest, his heart pounding with both hope and unease. The canopy above blocked much of the sunlight, leaving patches of gold and green dancing on the forest floor. Every step he took was careful, his eyes scanning for signs of Shadow. The horse had been gone for days, yet Eli felt he was getting closer. The trail, hidden among fallen leaves and broken branches, seemed almost alive, guiding him forward. As he moved deeper into the forest, the sounds of the plains faded away. The wind whispered differently here, carrying the scent of damp earth and wildflowers. Birds chirped softly, and somewhere in the distance, a stream gurgled over stones. It was peaceful and yet strange. Eli couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. Every rustle of leaves or snap of a twig made him pause. He tightened his grip on the reins, calling softly, "Shadow, come on, boy." Hours passed, and the forest grew thicker. The trail twisted and turned, sometimes leading up rocky slopes, other times dipping into shadowy hollows. Eli's thoughts wandered to Shadow's past adventures. He remembered when the horse had escaped into the hills after a sudden storm, and how Eli had spent the entire day searching, only to find Shadow waiting patiently by the creek, as if nothing had happened. Shadow was clever, resourceful, and brave, but Eli also knew that the horse could sense danger, and that made him cautious. It was then that Eli noticed something unusual. Among the hoof prints and animal tracks, there were footprints that did not belong to any creature he recognized. They were human, small and light, as if the person who made them had moved with care, leaving barely a mark. Eli stopped in his tracks, leaning closer to examine them. The footprints led off the main trail, toward a cluster of thick bushes and tangled vines. A strange feeling filled his chest, a mixture of curiosity, caution, and excitement. Who could be out here? Eli whispered to himself. The forest was remote, miles away from any town or settlement. It was possible that someone lived here, but it was unusual. People didn't often venture into these woods without reason. Eli took a deep breath, adjusting Daisy's reins, and decided to follow the footprints carefully. He moved slowly, making as little noise as possible. The forest seemed to watch him, every shadow and sound amplified in the quiet. As he approached the source of the footprints, Eli saw movement, a flicker of dark hair, a shadow slipping between the trees. He froze, unsure whether to call out or stay silent. The figure emerged into a small clearing bathed in dappled sunlight. It was a woman. She was unlike anyone Eli had ever seen. Her skin was warm brown, her dark hair long and flowing, and her eyes sharp and observant. She wore simple clothing made of animal hides, blending almost perfectly with the forest. There was a quiet strength in her stance, a calmness that commanded respect. Eli wanted to speak, to ask who she was and what she was doing in the forest, but no words came out. The woman studied him with equal curiosity, tilting her head slightly. There was no fear in her eyes, only a careful assessment, as if she were measuring whether he was friend or threat. Eli realized that she did not speak the same language he did, and he could not understand the sound she made. Still, her presence felt significant, almost like a message from the forest itself. For a moment, they simply observed each other, two strangers in a world where survival depended on skill, knowledge, and courage. Eli noticed that she carried no weapons, only a small pouch at her side, yet he could tell she was capable of defending herself. There was a quiet confidence in her movements, a grace that spoke of years of living in harmony with the wilderness. She was a mystery, and Eli felt both cautious and intrigued. Eli decided to approach slowly, keeping his hands visible. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, hoping she could understand his tone even if not his words. The woman did not step back, but she did not advance either. Instead, she watched him carefully, her eyes never leaving his face. Eli felt a strange sense of trust forming, a silent agreement that they could coexist for the moment without danger. He lowered himself from Daisy's back, tying the reins to a nearby tree. Daisy stamped her hooves nervously, sensing the tension in the air, but Eli whispered soothingly, patting her neck. The woman tilted her head again, her dark eyes following every movement. Eli reached into his satchel and pulled out an apple, offering it to her with an open hand. The gesture was simple, human, and honest. The woman studied the apple, then Eli, and after a moment's hesitation, she stepped forward and took it gently. This small act broke the invisible wall between them. Eli felt a wave of relief and curiosity. He did not know her name, where she came from, or why she was here, but something about her felt familiar, as if the land itself had sent her to him. He wanted to ask questions, but he realized that words alone would not suffice. They would have to find another way to communicate, through actions, gestures, and shared understanding. As the afternoon wore on, Eli noticed that the woman seemed to know the forest in a way he had never seen. She pointed to broken branches, signaling where a deer had passed. She tapped the ground lightly, indicating a hidden trail that led deeper into the woods. Eli followed, amazed by her knowledge. It was clear she had lived here for a long time, surviving on her own, reading the land and its signs with remarkable skill. He began to understand that she was not just mysterious, she was extraordinary. Together they moved cautiously, following the faint trail of hoof prints that Eli believed were Shadow's. The woman occasionally stopped, listening to the sounds of the forest, pointing silently, guiding him past hidden dangers like steep rocks or tangled roots. Eli realized that without her, he might have missed these clues entirely. It was an unspoken partnership, built on mutual respect and a shared goal. He felt grateful, though he did not yet understand the depth of the connection forming between them. As evening approached, the forest took on a magical quality. Sunlight filtered through the trees in golden beams, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Birds sang softly, and the distant sound of running water echoed through the trees. Eli felt a sense of calm, despite the urgency of his mission. He could sense that Shadow was near, perhaps just over the next ridge, and he felt hope stir in his chest. Then, just as the sun dipped below the horizon, Eli and the woman came to a small clearing. There, grazing quietly in the fading light, was Shadow. The horse lifted his head, ears pricked, and whinnied softly at Eli's arrival. Relief washed over him. He dismounted quickly, running forward to meet Shadow, stroking the horse's mane, whispering gentle words of reassurance. Shadow nuzzled him in return, as if understanding the days of worry and searching that had led to this moment. The woman watched silently, her expression unreadable but calm. She did not interfere, but Eli sensed her approval. Without speaking, she had helped him, guided him, and shared her knowledge. Eli realized that he owed her more than gratitude. She had saved Shadow and perhaps even him. For the first time, he considered the possibility that this woman, so strange and mysterious, could become an important part of his life. Night fell, and Eli built a small fire while keeping Shadow close. Daisy rested nearby, and the woman sat across from him, watching the flames. They still could not speak to each other with words, yet there was understanding in every gesture, the way she moved, the way she observed, the way Shadow seemed to recognize her calm presence. Eli felt a mixture of wonder and curiosity. Who was she? Where had she come from? And why had she appeared at this moment in the middle of the forest to help him? As the fire crackled, Eli began to notice small details. The woman carried tools made of stone and wood, fashioned with care. Her clothing was simple but practical, designed for survival and movement. Her eyes reflected intelligence, resilience, and perhaps sadness, though he could not know the reasons. Every movement she made spoke of a life lived closely with the land, one shaped by observation, patience, and respect. Eli felt both admiration and a growing sense of connection, even without words. Sleep came slowly that night, with the fire's warmth providing comfort and the forest's sounds keeping him alert. Shadow lay beside him, Daisy nearby, and the woman resting across from the fire. Eli could not understand her story, but he sensed that it was deep, filled with experiences and memories that were both beautiful and painful. He wondered what her life had been like before this moment, how she had survived in the wilderness alone, and what secrets she carried with her. As he drifted off to sleep, Eli realized that losing Shadow had led him to something far more mysterious and profound. The forest, the trail, the fear, and the hope, all of it had brought him here. And in the quiet night, surrounded by the sounds of nature, he felt that this encounter was only the beginning of a story he could never have imagined. The mysterious woman, with her quiet strength and deep connection to the land, had changed everything. The next morning, Eli awoke to the gentle sound of birdsong and the soft light of dawn filtering through the trees. Shadow nickered softly, sensing Eli's movement, while Daisy grazed nearby. Across the small clearing, the mysterious woman stirred, sitting upright and stretching her arms gracefully. Though she did not speak words Eli could understand, her presence was calm and reassuring. There was something about the way she observed the world, a quiet awareness that made Eli feel both curious and respectful. Eli knew that if he wanted Shadow safely home, he would need her help. The forest was vast and filled with hidden dangers, deep ravines, sudden storms, and wild animals that moved silently through the underbrush. Yet, as he watched her, he realized she already knew this land better than he ever could. Every movement she made was precise, every step careful. She seemed connected to the earth itself, as if she could read the land like a book. He approached her slowly, holding out a small bundle of dried meat and bread. "Eat," he said gently, hoping his meaning was clear. The woman studied him for a moment, then reached out and took the food carefully. There was no gesture of thanks, but her eyes softened slightly. Eli sensed that this small exchange was significant, an acknowledgement of trust and cooperation. It was the beginning of something he could not yet define, a bond forged not with words but with shared purpose. After breakfast, Eli began to explain as best as he could that he was searching for Shadow's owner. He pointed toward the horse, gestured toward the plains beyond the forest, and tried to communicate urgency. The woman watched him carefully, tilting her head, and then motioned for him to follow her deeper into the woods. Her movements were confident and purposeful, and Eli realized that she had something important to show him. As they walked, she led him along narrow trails hidden beneath thick ferns and fallen leaves. She pointed silently to broken branches, marking the passage of deer or wolves. She gestured toward the sky, indicating approaching weather. Eli followed, amazed at how much she understood the world around her. He began to realize that her silence was not emptiness, it was clarity. She did not need words because her knowledge of the land and its creatures spoke louder than any language. Hours passed as they moved through the forest together. Eli began to mirror her careful steps, paying attention to subtle signs he had once ignored. The way the wind shifted through the leaves, the faint footprints of animals in the mud, the scent of water carried on the breeze. Shadow and Daisy moved calmly beside them, sensing the woman's connection to the land. Eli felt a growing admiration for her skill and a deep gratitude for her guidance. At midday, they reached a small stream with crystal-clear water. The woman knelt and cupped her hands to drink, while Eli offered water to Shadow and Daisy. He noticed that she moved with ease, balancing on rocks and stepping over roots as if the forest were her home. There was no fear in her actions, only certainty. Eli realized how little he had understood about survival in the wilderness. Every step, every decision, every gesture mattered, and this woman had mastered it all. As they rested by the stream, Eli tried again to communicate. He drew in the dirt with a stick, sketching Shadow, the trail, and the direction home. She watched carefully, then drew her own symbols beside his, indicating a path through the forest he had not noticed. Eli studied her markings and nodded, understanding that she was offering him guidance, not orders. Slowly, he realized that they were learning from each other. Their partnership, though quiet, was growing stronger with every shared moment. The afternoon brought new challenges. A sudden rustle in the underbrush startled Daisy, who whinnied loudly. Eli's heart raced, expecting a wild animal, but the woman's calm presence kept him grounded. She held up a hand and motioned for silence, then pointed toward a pair of coyotes watching them from a distance. Eli froze, following her gaze. She then signaled with a small gesture, stepping carefully to avoid being noticed, keeping the animals at bay. Her knowledge of the forest and its dangers was astounding. Eli felt relief mixed with admiration. Without her, he might have panicked or taken the wrong path, risking both Shadow and himself. As they continued, Eli began to notice other subtle signs. She communicated with gestures, expressions, and movement, teaching him how to read the land in a way he had never imagined. A broken branch might indicate a hidden path. A bird's song could reveal approaching weather. Even the direction of moss on a tree hinted at water nearby. Eli realized that she was not just guiding him to Shadow, she was teaching him to survive, to notice, to understand. Each lesson strengthened their bond, even without words. By late afternoon, they reached a rocky ridge overlooking a vast valley. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. Below, Eli spotted Shadow grazing near a cluster of trees, the familiar black coat shining in the sunlight. Relief and joy surged through him. He reached out to the woman, nodding in gratitude. She acknowledged him with a simple tilt of her head, her dark eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. It was a silent acknowledgement of trust, effort, and accomplishment. But as they moved closer to Shadow, Eli sensed that their journey was far from over. The forest was still filled with hidden dangers, and the woman's caution reminded him that they were not entirely safe. She moved ahead, guiding him along a narrow path lined with thorny bushes and loose rocks. Eli followed carefully, grateful for her knowledge. Shadow watched them from a distance, ears flicking but did not bolt, sensing the calm authority of the woman. They finally reached Shadow, and Eli knelt beside him, stroking his mane and whispering words of reassurance. The horse nuzzled him, responding to the love and concern that had carried Eli through these long days. The woman watched silently, her presence steady and protective. Eli realized that she had not only guided him to Shadow, but had also taught him the value of patience, observation, and quiet strength. Their partnership was no longer about simple survival. It had become something deeper, built on respect and understanding. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the valley, Eli set up a small camp for the night. He gathered firewood while the woman led the horses to a safe clearing. Though they still could not speak the same language, their actions communicated everything necessary: care, respect, and cooperation. Eli felt a sense of wonder at how seamlessly they worked together, each learning from the other, each trusting the other in a world that could be unforgiving. Around the fire, Eli offered the woman more food. She accepted with the same careful grace as before, eating silently while watching him. He began to understand that her silence was not emptiness, but observation. Every movement, every gesture, every expression mattered. He found himself thinking about her story, her past, and the experiences that had shaped her into the strong, capable, and mysterious figure before him. He wanted to know more, yet he also respected her privacy, sensing that some things could only be learned with time. Night fell completely, and the forest seemed to hold its breath. Shadow and Daisy rested nearby, while Eli and the woman kept watch over the small fire. He realized that the bond they had formed in just one day was extraordinary. A shared goal, mutual trust, and quiet cooperation had united them, creating a connection that went beyond words. Eli understood that this partnership was rare, two people from different worlds, brought together by circumstance, learning to rely on each other in the face of uncertainty. As he drifted off to sleep, Eli reflected on the day's events. Losing Shadow had been devastating, but it had also led him to someone remarkable. The woman's skill, intelligence, and quiet strength had shown him that there were ways to navigate the world he had never considered. He realized that their partnership was not just about finding a lost horse. It was about discovering new ways to trust, to understand, and to survive. Eli woke the next morning with a renewed sense of determination. The forest still held challenges, and their journey home would not be simple, but he no longer felt alone. Shadow and Daisy were safe, and the woman's presence was a source of guidance and reassurance. He felt a sense of gratitude he could not express in words, yet it was deep and true. Their partnership, though unspoken, was now a bond that neither could ignore. Together, they continued through the forest, moving as one. Eli learned to anticipate her gestures, to read the signs of the land she taught him to notice, and to trust the silent guidance she offered. Each step strengthened their connection, and Eli began to understand that sometimes the most powerful relationships are those built without words, through action, observation, and shared experience. By midday, they reached the edge of a small meadow, where the sunlight streamed freely and the air smelled sweet with wildflowers. Eli paused, taking in the beauty of the moment. Shadow grazed nearby, Daisy following, and the woman stood at the edge of the meadow, scanning the horizon. Eli realized that he had come to rely on her presence in ways he could not have imagined. She had not only helped him survive and find Shadow, but she had also changed his perspective on life, trust, and connection. The day was far from over, but Eli felt a quiet confidence. With the woman by his side, he knew they could face whatever the forest had in store. Their journey had begun with loss, but it had transformed into something greater, an unexpected partnership, filled with respect, learning, and mutual reliance. Eli knew that the path ahead would still hold challenges, but for the first time since Shadow went missing, he felt a sense of hope that was deeper than fear, stronger than worry, and brighter than any uncertainty the forest could bring. Eli and the woman set out early the next morning, leaving the safety of the forest for the open plains. Shadow and Daisy followed closely, their hooves kicking up dust as the sun rose over the horizon. The morning air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of grass and wildflowers, but Eli knew the journey would not be easy. The plains were open, exposed, and full of potential dangers. They had survived the forest together, but the wider world held its own threats, and Eli's mind was alert, scanning the horizon for anything unusual. As they rode, Eli reflected on the bond he had formed with the woman. Though he did not know her name, her calm presence had become a source of strength. He could not explain why he felt such trust toward a stranger, yet every step of the journey had proven her knowledge and skill. She guided them around rough terrain, pointed out hidden water sources, and warned him of unseen obstacles. Her gestures were precise and deliberate, teaching him without words, showing him a way of seeing the world that was both simple and profound. Hours into the ride, the wind began to shift. Eli noticed the subtle signs she had taught him to watch. A sudden rustle in the grass, the way the clouds moved across the sky, the way birds changed their flight paths. She raised a hand, signaling him to stop. Eli followed her gaze and saw a small group of figures on horseback approaching in the distance. His heart sank. He did not recognize them, and the sight of riders moving steadily across the plains made him uneasy. The woman remained calm, her dark eyes assessing the situation with quiet intensity. Eli dismounted, leading Shadow and Daisy to a small rise where they could observe without being seen. The riders were distant, but their posture and movement suggested they were experienced and purposeful. He whispered to the woman, hoping she could understand. She nodded slightly, her expression unreadable, and began to scan the ground for signs. Broken twigs, tracks, the direction of dust rising from the rider's path. Eli realized that she was reading the land as skillfully as she had in the forest, interpreting subtle clues that he could barely notice. The riders passed without noticing them, and Eli felt a wave of relief. He turned to the woman, grateful for her vigilance. Though they still could not communicate in words, he sensed her understanding of the dangers of the plains. Her life in the wilderness had prepared her for situations he had never imagined, and her presence reminded him that trust was not given lightly. It was earned through action, observation, and skill. As they continued, Eli noticed that the woman occasionally paused to examine the ground. She pointed to faint tracks leading off the main trail, and he followed, trusting her judgment. The trail was rough, dotted with rocks and sudden dips, but she guided them carefully, avoiding potential hazards. Eli marveled at her ability to navigate without maps or compasses, relying solely on her instincts and knowledge of the land. He realized that the journey was as much a lesson as it was a mission to return home. By midday, they reached a shallow river that cut across their path. The water was clear but swift, and crossing it would be tricky. Eli dismounted, leading the horses carefully to the edge. The woman stepped lightly onto the rocks, testing their stability. She gestured for him to follow a certain path, avoiding the deeper currents. Eli obeyed, guiding Shadow and Daisy with gentle commands. Step by step, they crossed the river safely, each movement measured and deliberate. The woman's guidance had saved them from potential disaster, and Eli felt deep respect for her skill and foresight. As they moved on, the landscape began to change. The plains gave way to rolling hills, dotted with scrub and small groves of trees. The sun climbed high, and the heat began to weigh on them. Eli offered water to Shadow and Daisy, while the woman drank sparingly, conserving her strength. Eli noticed the careful way she rationed her resources, the small habits that reflected a life of survival and resilience. He realized that every action, every decision, carried meaning and purpose. She had survived alone in the wilderness for a reason, and her strength was not just physical, it was mental, emotional, and instinctive. Suddenly, a loud cry echoed across the hills. Eli froze, his hand on Shadow's mane. The woman's eyes narrowed, scanning the distance. Another cry followed, closer this time, and Eli realized they were being followed. He motioned for silence, and she nodded. Together, they moved quickly but cautiously, using the terrain to stay hidden. Eli's heart raced, and he could feel Shadow and Daisy tense beneath him. The sound of hooves and voices approached, and he realized that whoever was following them could be dangerous. The woman led them into a small grove of trees, providing cover from the prying eyes of the riders. They crouched low, hiding among the shadows. Eli's mind raced with questions. Who were these people? Were they rustlers? Were they angry townsfolk suspicious of the woman? He did not know, but he trusted her judgment. She gestured for him to remain quiet, and her steady calm reassured him. For the first time, he felt that he could rely entirely on her instincts, without hesitation or doubt. Hours passed as the riders moved on, unaware of their presence. Eli exhaled, relief mixing with admiration for the woman's foresight. She motioned for him to continue, and they slowly emerged from the grove, careful not to leave any traces behind. Eli realized that the dangers of the plains were not just physical. They were also about perception, understanding, and the ability to anticipate threats. The woman had mastered all of these skills, and Eli felt both humbled and grateful. As the sun began its descent, they reached the outskirts of a small settlement. Eli's heart lifted at the thought of returning home, yet he knew that the town would be different with the woman by his side. People would be suspicious, perhaps fearful, and their journey would require more than just survival skills. It would require courage, tact, and understanding. Eli glanced at her, and though she remained silent, he sensed that she understood the challenge ahead. Together they had faced the forest, the river, and the plains. Now they would face the human world. As they entered the town, Eli noticed the curious glances of townsfolk. Some whispered, others stared openly, and a few children peeked from behind doors and fences. He could feel the tension building. The woman moved calmly, maintaining her poise despite the attention. Eli realized that her strength was not just in survival, but in the ability to remain composed in the face of uncertainty and judgment. He felt a surge of pride and protectiveness. She had helped him more than he could express, and he would ensure her safety in return. Eli guided the horses through the town, keeping a careful watch on the people around them. Some eyed Shadow and Daisy, while others focused on the woman. their expressions a mixture of curiosity, caution, and suspicion. Eli could feel the weight of their judgment, but he remained determined to protect her. He led them to his small cabin, a familiar place of comfort and security. Inside, he tended to the horses, providing food and water while the woman observed quietly, her eyes alert and thoughtful. Once the animals were settled, Eli turned to her. He tried to speak, to offer words of reassurance, but she simply watched him, her gaze calm and steady. He realized that words were not necessary. Her presence, her understanding, and the silent trust between them spoke more than any language could. He felt a deep sense of gratitude and admiration. She had guided him through the wilderness, saved Shadow, and now stood beside him in a world that might not understand her. That night, as the fire crackled in the cabin's hearth, Eli reflected on the day's journey. They had faced danger, uncertainty, and the unknown together. The plains, the river, and the hills had tested their strength and resilience, but they had emerged stronger, bonded by shared experience and trust. Eli realized that the woman was not just a guide, she was a teacher, a protector, and a companion. Her knowledge, courage, and calm presence had transformed the journey from a simple search for a lost horse into a profound experience of connection, respect, and understanding. As sleep settled over the cabin, Eli felt a mixture of relief and anticipation. The town would present new challenges, new questions, and perhaps even new dangers, yet he also felt hope. They had survived the wilderness together, and that experience had created a bond that neither could ignore. The woman's mysterious presence had changed his life in ways he could not yet understand, and he knew that their journey was far from over. In the quiet of the night, Eli whispered to Shadow, feeling the horse's warmth and trust. The woman remained across the room, watching silently, a steady and calming presence. Eli realized that losing Shadow had led him to something far greater, a connection, a partnership, and a glimpse into a world of understanding and resilience he had never known. He closed his eyes, feeling the weight of the journey, the relief of survival, and the quiet strength of the woman who had become a part of his life. The morning sun rose slowly over the small town, casting warm light on the wooden cabins and dirt streets. Eli stood at the edge of his yard, watching Shadow and Daisy graze peacefully in the small paddock he had prepared. The mysterious woman stood nearby, her dark eyes scanning the horizon with the calm awareness that had guided him through the forest, river, and plains. Today was different. Today, the journey that had begun with loss, danger, and uncertainty was about to meet a new challenge, the world of people and the life waiting beyond the wilderness. Eli knew that some townsfolk would be wary of the woman. She was unfamiliar, her presence unusual, and her heritage might bring suspicion. Yet he felt a quiet confidence. She had proven herself in ways that words could not describe. She had guided him, protected him, and helped him find what he had lost. More than that, she had shown him a perspective of the world he had never understood, a way to see, to notice, and to trust. He realized that her value went far beyond survival skills. She had become a partner in every sense of the word. As Eli led the horses to the stable, a small group of neighbors approached. Their eyes were curious, some filled with caution, others with open wonder. Children peeked around their parents, whispering excitedly about the stranger who had arrived in town. Eli felt the tension, but he remained calm. He gestured toward the woman, trying to show that she meant no harm. She stood silently, her posture strong yet unthreatening, her eyes calm and watchful. The townsfolk studied her for a moment before a few of them stepped forward, offering tentative greetings. The woman responded with a nod, a small gesture, but it carried meaning. Eli realized that communication did not always require words. Her confidence and calmness spoke volumes, showing the townsfolk that she was not a threat. Slowly, the tension began to ease. Some villagers relaxed, smiling politely, while others merely observed, still cautious but no longer alarmed. Eli felt a sense of pride and relief. She had already won their silent approval by simply being herself, strong, capable, and composed. As the day progressed, Eli introduced the woman to his home and work. She observed quietly, learning the routines of feeding the horses, repairing fences, and managing the small garden. Eli found himself explaining things that once seemed ordinary: how to balance water for the animals, how to mix feed properly, how to ensure Shadow and Daisy were calm and healthy. The woman watched carefully, her eyes noting every detail. She helped silently, adjusting the horses' bridles or smoothing hay in the stalls with care and precision. Eli was amazed at how quickly she adapted, her understanding of the animals almost instinctive. Word began to spread through the town about the woman and her remarkable skills. People who had been skeptical grew curious, visiting Eli's yard to see her in action. They watched as she handled Shadow and Daisy with patience, reading their moods, calming their anxiety, and guiding them with gentle confidence. Some whispered about her past, wondering where she had come from, while others marveled at her knowledge of the land and animals. Eli realized that her presence was changing the town's perception, turning suspicion into admiration. Eli spent time with her as well, teaching her small details about his life in the town, sharing stories about his past, and showing her the paths he often traveled. Though they still could not speak the same language fully, their connection grew stronger through gestures, shared work, and the quiet moments between tasks. Eli noticed how much he had come to rely on her judgment, her observation, and her presence. She was no longer just a guide through the wilderness. She was a companion, a trusted friend, and perhaps something more profound. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low in the sky, Eli and the woman walked through the outskirts of town. Shadow and Daisy followed calmly, moving with ease through the familiar streets. People stopped to watch, whispering and pointing, yet Eli felt no fear. He knew that the woman's quiet strength had already won respect. Children approached cautiously, reaching out to pet the horses, while adults observed politely from a distance. The woman remained composed, allowing the people to approach on their own terms, teaching patience and trust through her example. As evening fell, Eli prepared a small meal in the cabin, while the woman helped tend the horses. They worked together without words, the rhythm of their actions forming a silent conversation. Eli reflected on the journey that had brought them here: the loss of Shadow, the dangers of the forest, the pursuit across the plains, and the challenges of navigating human suspicion. Each moment had tested them, yet it had also revealed their strengths, resilience, and the bond that had formed between them. After the horses were settled for the night, Eli sat by the fire, watching the flames flicker. The woman joined him, her eyes reflecting the glow of the fire. For the first time, Eli felt the full weight of their shared journey. She had changed his life in ways he could not have anticipated. Losing Shadow had led to a discovery far greater than the horse itself. He had found a companion, someone who understood the world in a way he never had, and someone whose presence brought a sense of calm, guidance, and connection. In the days that followed, the woman began to learn more about the town. She observed the markets, the gatherings, and the routines of the villagers. Though she remained quiet, her gestures and actions communicated understanding and respect. Eli continued to teach her about his life, sharing small details, routines, and stories. Slowly, the townsfolk began to accept her presence, seeing the value she brought to their community through her skills, insight, and quiet strength. Eli and the woman spent time exploring the areas surrounding the town, learning from each other, and sharing experiences. Shadow and Daisy followed, grazing peacefully as the two humans navigated the land together. Eli realized that the bond they had formed was not just about survival, it was about trust, respect, and the understanding that comes from shared experience. The woman had taught him patience, observation, and resilience, while he had offered guidance, safety, and companionship. Together, they had grown stronger, wiser, and more connected. One afternoon, Eli took the woman to a small hill overlooking the plains. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange, pink, and purple. He gestured to the horizon, showing her the vast expanse of land they had crossed together. The woman looked out silently, her expression calm, thoughtful, and unyielding. Eli understood that she carried her past with her, the experiences that had shaped her, the challenges she had overcome, and the resilience that had allowed her to survive alone. He felt a deep sense of respect, admiration, and gratitude. Eli realized that life had a way of guiding people to where they needed to be. Losing Shadow had been devastating, yet it had brought him to someone extraordinary. The woman's presence had transformed his world, teaching him lessons he could never have learned alone. Her strength, insight, and quiet courage had shown him the value of trust, partnership, and resilience. He understood that their journey was not just about returning to the town. It was about building a new life, one that embraced the unexpected, the mysterious, and the extraordinary. As days turned into weeks, the woman became a part of Eli's life and the town. People gradually grew accustomed to her presence, seeing her not as a stranger, but as someone who had earned respect through skill, patience, and quiet wisdom. Children began to approach her freely, learning from her gestures and actions, while adults observed, slowly understanding the depth of her knowledge and experience. Eli watched with quiet pride, realizing that she had become more than a companion. She was a teacher, a guide, and a friend to many. Eli spent long evenings with her, sharing stories, laughter, and quiet reflection. Though their words were limited, their understanding was complete. Shadow and Daisy rested nearby, symbols of the journey that had brought them together. Eli thought about the path they had traveled, the fear, the danger, the trust, and the lessons learned. He realized that the loss he had feared had been transformed into something far greater: discovery, connection, and a new beginning. One quiet night, as stars sparkled in the sky above, Eli sat beside the woman and gestured toward Shadow. The horse nuzzled his hand and he smiled, realizing that their journey had taught him more than he could have imagined. The woman, sitting beside him, offered a gentle nod, acknowledging the bond they shared and the journey they had completed. Though words were few, their understanding was complete, a silent agreement that they had faced the world together and emerged stronger, wiser, and connected. In the weeks and months that followed, Eli, Shadow, Daisy, and the woman built a new life together. They worked on the farm, explored the surrounding lands, and helped the town in small, meaningful ways. The woman's skills, knowledge, and quiet presence became an invaluable part of the community. Eli felt a profound sense of gratitude, understanding that the journey had not ended with finding Shadow. It had begun a new chapter, one filled with friendship, respect, and the promise of a shared future. Eli often reflected on the lessons he had learned. That loss can lead to unexpected discoveries, that trust and partnership can form in the most unlikely ways, and that courage and patience can overcome fear and uncertainty. The woman had brought something extraordinary into his life, a perspective, a skill, and a bond that could not be broken. Together, they had faced the wilderness, danger, and human suspicion, and together, they had built a life that honored every challenge and every triumph along the way. In the end, Eli realized that the journey had been about more than a lost horse. It had been about resilience, trust, and connection. Shadow had been the reason he set out, but the woman had been the reward he never expected. The plains, the forest, and the town had all played their part in shaping this story, teaching him that life's greatest gifts often come from the most surprising places. And as the sun set over the horizon, painting the sky with colors of hope and promise, Eli, the horses, and the mysterious woman stood together, ready to face whatever the future held, bound by trust, respect, and an unspoken understanding that would guide them forever.